When we say East Texas now, that's just what we mean. We mean this immediate moment through this miraculous technology that we've got here. I'm Michael Coleman, KLTV Sports Director. Don't worry, Deb's to my right. She's driving the car. I'm just a passenger. Hey, we're going to go to San Francisco. That's where a very, very good friend of mine is. He's always traveling. Bob Kendrick, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum out of Kansas City, Missouri. And he was gracious enough to say yes, and I know he has a crazy busy schedule, so we will not keep him long. Bob, looks like you've been in my closet. How you doing?
Man, Michael, I'm hanging in there, brother. It's good to see you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, listen, I'm glad you could say yes, because I know you've been really buzz busy because of the news that was released on Tuesday. Let's get right into it. Negro League Baseball stats are now part of Major League Baseball. In the past, it had been said that the Negro League stats were not standard, to whatever that would mean. But you were part of a right. But you were part of a committee, I guess, for 3 years or whatever, that kind of did some research, and this is what we have: is the integration of, pardon the pun, the integration of the Negro Leaguers with Major League Baseball.
A long time coming, Michael. You may recall in December of 2020, Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred made a historic announcement that first and foremost, Major League Baseball was at long last recognizing the Negro Leagues for what we already knew it to be, a major league, and that they would work to roll the statistics of the Negro Leagues into the record books of Major League Baseball. And as you mentioned, it took about 3 years to kind of unearth this kind of quantitative data that was necessary to be able to bring this information to the baseball fan base. You're right, I was on the committee, but I didn't really do any of the work. Those Negro League historians, man, is a dream team of Negro League historians who really did the lion's share of the work to make this happen. And as I tell people, I'm not going to say that this was like finding a needle in a haystack, but it damn near was. They worked so diligently to pull this information together, and that's what we saw brought forth officially yesterday. Of course, the news leaked out on Tuesday, but the official introduction to this was on Wednesday, and it was eye-opening for a lot of baseball fans because they saw names that they may not have been familiar with on the top of a number of major statistical categories in Major League Baseball.
You know, when you think about, we're going to look at some video here. When you think about this whole transition, when it came to integration, when it came to anything having to do with, you know, the racial barriers, it had to go through the courts. It had to go through law and all of that. But in this case here, there wasn't a court necessary, just some research on what is fair, and that's all you can ask, correct?
That's all you could ever ask, and that's why I have to tip my cap to Commissioner Manfred, because his embracing of this history has been instrumental in a lot of major milestones, Michael, that we've seen here recently around the Negro Leagues. Just a week or so before this announcement, the Players Association and MLB announced that they were expanding the pool of Negro Leaguers who would get pension. And of course, as you know, later this month in Birmingham, there will be an epic salute to the Negro Leagues game held at Rick Wood Field. And this is going to be monumental. And so these are things that we are very fortunate to be right there front and center and be a part of it. But it also speaks to the leadership of Commissioner Manfred, the partnership that we have with Major League Baseball Players Association and my dear friend, Tony Clark, that we're seeing these kinds of things come to realization. And I couldn't be more prouder of the relationship that we have with both arms of our game, MLB and MLBPA.
Let's talk about the irony of this. It struck me. 1947, Jackie Robinson crosses the color barrier, and yet 77 years later, another aspect of segregation finally gets resolved. Isn't that crazy?
You know, it's progress. Incremental, but progress. And Michael, you are obviously, you've been around our museum for quite some time. and you're very knowledgeable about the history. And so you know that you cannot reduce the story of the Negro Leagues to mere statistics. But for those who needed quantitative data, because there's always this level of doubt around how good these players really were. They hear me count them all the time. I've been telling people for the longest how good Josh Gibson was. And now you see his name at the top of a number of major statistical categories. But the Negro Leagues are far bigger than just stats. But what I hope will happen is through these stats that it will be the gateway to deeper understanding and wanting to learn about these players. Because just because you don't know their names, you're not familiar with their names, don't mean they weren't great. And so as a fan, it should spark your curiosity to want to learn more about them. And I hope it will drive them from East Texas and other parts down to Kansas City to see old Bob at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
I'll encourage them in my sportscast. Let me ask you this. When you think about this being a social eye-opening venture, if you will, for me in our lifetime, the last time something like this in terms of society and their input, the racial barrier, was your hero, and I know he's your hero, Hank Aaron, when he was on his way to breaking Babe Ruth's record, all the threats that he got because he was pursuing. He wasn't trying to break the record. He just a good ball player, and this happened to be in the way of Babe Ruth's record.
Yeah, the record just got in the way.
Yeah,
it just got in the way, and he just broke it. But it was the racial society that we were in then, and we still see tinges of it to this day. The thought that this black man in the Deep South breaking this hero of Major League Baseball's record just didn't sit well. And I know with the release of those statistics, and all of a sudden these Negro Leaguers are in right there next to some of the greatest names in Major League Baseball, the white Major League Baseball players, household names. There will be a cross section of baseball people who will not be happy about this. I think we all knew that, but you don't let that stand in your way of doing what is the right thing. And again, I applaud baseball because I'm sure if I knew it, they knew it as well. And they never allowed that to try to dissuade them from pulling this project together. People should know about the players of the Negro Leagues. And I still think there's a little bit of this narrative that if it didn't happen in the major leagues, then it didn't happen. And we're here to tell you, yes, it did. And we used to have a poster that we carried in our gift shop, Michael, and it says, just because they weren't in the same league as Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb doesn't mean that they weren't in the same league as Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And that's where I hope the inquisitive nature of those true baseball fans, they'll want to learn more about these names. They may have heard Josh Gibson's name. Maybe they've heard Oscar Charleston's name. But when we talk about guys like Chino Smith, and when Satchel Paige says Chino Smith was one of the greatest hitters he ever faced, and if Satchel Paige says he was one of the greatest, you got to take it for what it meant, because Satchel knew. And so that's not one of the more household names, even within the echelon of the Negro Leagues. So maybe that's going to pique some curiosity, a deeper learning, understanding, hopefully an appreciation for what these players were able to do both on and off the field.
How about this? Willie Mays, we all know about. Hank Aaron, we just mentioned. A lot of folks don't realize they too played in the Negro Leagues in their youth.
Well, and a kid out of Dallas, Texas by the name of Ernie Banks came out of the Negro Leagues. Yeah, the litany of great stars that came out of this league. And I tell people this all the time. Talent in the Negro Leagues, Michael, wouldn't take a back seat to any league. And the only thing that separates the Negro Leagues from Major League Baseball historically has been resources. The Major Leagues were better funded. They had more money. Outside of that, man, the Negro Leagues were well organized. The talent was exemplary. That's it. It was just the resources that separated the two. And of course, the pigmentation of their skin.
Final question. Throw a picture. There's a picture of you and I at your second home. Pretty soon your first home. That's you're always there. Just a couple of years ago we took. Let me ask you. This photo. Oh yeah, let's talk about this photo here. Okay, Newcomb, Dr. King, Jackie Robinson, Campanella. Give us some text to this.
Well, the late great Don Newcomb, Michael, used to always tell a story of he, Jackie, and Campy having dinner with Dr. King. And Dr. King thanking them for how they helped make his job easier. Now, can you imagine this? This is the greatest civil rights leader in certainly in our lifetime. And he's looking at Jackie Robinson and saying, you made my job easier. And what it reminds us all of, if for those of us who subscribes to the belief that one man cannot, or I should say one individual, cannot invoke change, you need to look no further than Jackie Robinson. Because when he walked out on that field as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers on April 15, 1947, he was not only going through immense racial and social pressure, but Michael, the side that is oftentimes not talked about is the fact that he was carrying 21 million Black folks on his back when he crossed those lines. And had he failed, in the minds of many, an entire race of people would have failed. And so he's getting it on both sides of the ledger. And somehow he handled himself with tremendous grace, class, and dignity, and played the game at such a high level. And it helped change our game for the better, but it also helped change this country for the better. And as you know, Jackie Robinson was handpicked from the great Kansas City Monarchs. Every one of those players who were with Dr. King in that photograph, in that beautiful painting, I should say, and the painting is called Grace. And you can see them holding hands saying grace. All three of the players came out of the Negro Leagues. That's Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, three-time MVP, before a tragic car accident derailed what was still a Hall of Fame career. And Don Newcomb, who in my estimation should be in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. They all come out of the Negro Leagues. They're just a sampling of that talent. You already mentioned Willie Mays. You already mentioned, we mentioned Ernie Banks. Henry Aaron. They were young stars who made their way to the major leagues. But man, there were so many before them who were just as good. Some may argue even better. And I know that's scary, folks, to think that there were ball players that might have been better than Willie Mays and Henry Aaron. But there just might have been some ball players that were better than Willie Mays and Henry Aaron, and mainstream America missed them because of Jim Crow and the ugliness of American segregation. And so, yes, these players deserve to be recognized. And I'm very proud of what we're seeing happen in and around Negro Leagues history.
One final question, I promise you this time. What will be the impact, if any, with the inclusion of the Negro League stats in now the Major League Baseball records? Any impact on the museum, you think?
Well, we're already seeing it because, Michael, I've been running my mouth for the last 24 hours, man. I started talking yesterday at 5 a.m. I think I was still talking in my sleep. I got up at 4 a.m. to come out here to San Francisco, and we're still talking about it. And so it's created so much attention, not just for the Negro Leagues, but for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum as the caretaker of this precious piece of baseball and Americana. And I think it also magnifies why this museum is so important, because what I want to make sure that future generations who will see Josh Gibson's name listed amongst those players from Major League yesterday, who may think that it's always been that way. And it hadn't always been that way. Yeah, we cannot lose sight that Josh Gibson, Oscar Charleston, Cool Papa Bell, Turkey Stearns, these names that are listed in those statistics, at one point in time, they couldn't play in the major leagues. And it's still that game-changing spirit that they generated, that drive, the passion, the perseverance that they demonstrated that is still helping change this game today. But we also have to remember the circumstances and obstacles that were put in front of them, that they were driven by a passion for this sport that allowed them to overcome that. And again, all of that I think is being felt today, and it makes the museum, I believe, even more important in the grand scheme of things.
Well, my friend, thank you so much. And I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but boy, you talk good. Hey, thanks a lot, Bob. Enjoy your trip in San Francisco, and I'll be home in a couple of weeks. Maybe get a chance to get together, have lunch or something. I will definitely come by the museum. I always do. Thank you, man. I'm proud of you. Congratulations, and continue the good work, my friend.
Hey, looking forward to seeing you in KC, and thank you as well for the opportunity.
All right, buddy. Take care. That's Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and you know he's such an orator, Devin. I mean, this cat, you know, you could put him in the pulpit, you know, and the flock will come.
That was my impression. Is he's such a treasure trove of information, but the way that he says it isn't somebody that's just about statistics or just about facts. He brings it to life. He was able to talk about that painting in such a way that the painting popped off of the page. You felt like you were sitting at that dinner table with all of these people, and you knew exactly who each one was, their background, what's going to become of them after this moment in this painting. Man, yeah, he really does have a way of painting a picture with words.
You know, Bob and I first met when I was in Kansas City, and I had never been to the museum yet. I'd been out of state working or whatever, and he was not the president at the time. He got ousted. He got beat by some guy came in, and the board chose him over Bob, and then Bob stuck around. Because Buck O'Neill was his mentor. Buck O'Neill was the first black assistant baseball coach, and was with the Cubs, and he groomed Ernie Banks, who we just talked about being from Dallas. And Bob was in the newspaper business as promotions. And they said, listen, we want you to go promote the museum, ... And it wasn't near what it is today. And he said, the more I got to be around Buck O'Neill, the more I thought, this is where I need to be. I want to be over here to promote the museum. And it worked out that way. He went to a college in Kansas City on a basketball scholarship. You'd think it'd be baseball, but it was basketball. And he's originally from Georgia. That's his home state. And he and Buck O'Neill got to be so tight. And Buck O'Neill, years ago, they were letting Negro Leaguers into the Hall of Fame, Major League Baseball. His name was on the list. Buck did not own a cell phone. Bob bought him a cell phone. So I gave them the number that you're going to get the call from Cooperstown that you're going in. They had and I wasn't there, but he's telling me the story. They had a big celebration at the museum.
Wow.
That call never happened.
What?
Bob did not, or Mr. O'Neill did not get into the Hall of Fame. And they said tears throughout the whole facility at the celebration. Buck O'Neill was humble enough to say, listen, if you guys think I'm a Hall of Famer, that's all that counts to me. Oh, man. You know, and so that was his guy. And when Bob tells these stories, I've seen him do these tours, it's like, were you there?
Yeah.
You weren't there in 1922.
That's what it sounds like. It sounds like he pulled up a chair into this painting.
And so he does a great job. He's highly thought of, as you can imagine. And since he got and became the president, because the other guy bailed. And then, in fact, the reason why that guy bailed is, and Bob left. Bob was willing to work with this guy side by side. But that gentleman said, Buck had died. He said, listen, there's nothing that Buck O'Neill can continue to do for us. He's dead. He's gone. Let's move on from that. And Bob was like, oh, I can't
That's
be
not
here.
happening. Yeah.
They lost a lot of sponsors.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so when Bob got back in it, because we met, I gave him a call out of the blue. We had never met, and we had a 3-hour lunch. This is before he got back in.
That doesn't surprise me after this conversation.
Oh, we had a 3 yeah, right.
Bit,
we had a 3 hour. I said, man, so if they asked you to come back, would you go back? He said, yeah, I would. What he was doing, he was working for a nonprofit that was working with disabled kids before he got back to the museum.
So just a terrible guy in general is what I'm hearing. Just real awful
And
person.
so he gets back, and once I said, after 6 months being back in the building as the president, I said, what's been the toughest thing? He said, man, the toughest thing has been to bring the sponsors back.
Right.
They got a bad taste in their mouth from the last regime, and I'm still having to build things up. He's built it up so much that Major League Baseball has donated $500,000 to the museum, and he gets those kind of reactions. That's where he gets that. And now with this just happening, it's even more. He's an ambassador. He travels all around the country. I met up with him in Austin 3 years ago. He said the name Cool Papa Bell.
Okay.
Papa Bell was a second baseman, grew up in Austin, and the high school he went to had a ceremony for him, and they called Bob and said, would you be our MC? And he said, man, how far are you from Austin? I said, I'm 4 hours. Oh, man. I said, no, dude, what you going to be in Austin?
Yeah, I'll be there.
I'm there. I'll see you there. And so that's just the kind of guy he is.
Wow.
And he's done so much for the museum, and I can't help, and he just mentioned that it is, that the boost the museum and the history of baseball, not just black baseball, but all of baseball will get because of what these young kids are seeing and reading, and who's this guy, who's that guy. And so it's I think it's a magical moment right now.
Oh,
and there are naysayers, and I've seen stuff on social media this morning, the woke this, the woke that. All right, you know what? We don't have time for that.
No.
And so
I think what's incredible is I think this is an opportunity for generations of baseball lovers to come together and learn about players they should have known about, but don't have that background and that information, And I know when you're young and you're just starting to figure out baseball cards and just starting to figure out collecting, and you're learning your players, and it's this excitement of what team do I like, who do I connect with, and the identities, and learning all about them, and then you can't stop talking about them for from ages 7 to 10, that's all you're doing,
And Bob has a radio show on Sirius called Black Diamonds, and he gives you baseball history from the Negro Leagues.
And that's what it's so exciting, that's integrating all of these statistics. And he was talking about finding names that maybe you're not familiar with on top of some of those old favorites that it seems like is more universally known, household names that you guys were discussing. Now, father and son, mother and daughter, can now together be introduced to this whole new roster of players. It's like finding your favorite show has 10 extra seasons that you never knew about.
And you know what? We haven't talked so much about just not the games per se, but baseball in general so much as we have since this announcement was made on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get better. So thanks to Bob Kendrick. And if you ever get to Kansas City, 18th and Vine, the Jazz District, go check out. Tell him Coleman sent me. Oh, come on in.
Yep, absolutely. I'm definitely going to be checking it out. I've never had the opportunity to go, but that's definitely now on my list.
I hope you do.
Thanks, Coleman, for coming in. Michael Coleman, KLTV Sports Director. Ladies and gents, don't be a stranger. I'm glad to finally see you. I haven't talked to you in a bit. I know it.
I'll be back, like Arnold would say.
Fantastic.